Before Walmart, before Amazon, there was Main Street, where every handshake meant something, and the butcher knew your name. The sidewalks were cracked but familiar, the kind of streets where kids pedaled their bikes without worry and mothers waved from porches as they hung laundry to dry. Saturday mornings carried their own rhythm. A trip downtown wasn't just about errands, it was about belonging. You could hear the barber's clippers buzzing through the open door, smell fresh bread from the bakery, and catch the sound of a bell jingling each time someone stepped into the five and dime. In those days, life orbited around a few blocks where nearly everything a family needed could be found. There was the butcher who wrapped meat in brown paper and slipped in an extra bone for the dog. The grocer knew which family had 5 kids and made sure to set aside the best peaches before they were gone. The drugstore counter wasn't just for prescriptions. It was where neighbors sat on stools, shared coffee, and swapped the latest news. People didn't just buy things. They built relationships that stretched over years. For children, Main Street was a playground wrapped in safety. A quarter in their pocket meant a trip to the candy counter, where choices felt endless. Penny candy, a comic book, or maybe a toy from the spinning rack, all of it was magical. Not because it was expensive, but because it was theirs. They could walk from one store to the next without fear, greeted by adults who knew their parents by name. In a world before cell phones and constant distractions, there was an unspoken trust that the town itself was watching over its children. Every storefront carried its own story. The barber had the same chair for decades, its leather warm but reliable. The shoe repair shop smelled of polish and glue, a reminder that things were fixed, not replaced. Evenings often ended with families strolling together, stopping at the ice cream shop or just window shopping under neon signs that flickered to life as the sun went down. These rituals gave people more than goods. They gave them a sense of rhythm, of community, of being part of something larger than themselves. It was a slower time, measured not in efficiency, but in connection. Price mattered, but not more than trust. Shoppers returned to the same stores because they felt a bond, a loyalty that went beyond saving a dime. Main Street was not just a location. It was the living heart of a town, pulsing with the laughter of children, the quiet work of shopkeepers, and the steady flow of everyday life. But time doesn't stand still, and neither did America's way of shopping. It started with smaller, bigger stores, bigger parking lots. At first, it was exciting. Families who had always shopped in cramped aisles downtown suddenly found themselves with space to wander. The shelves stretched longer, the choices seemed endless, and the lure of free parking meant no more circling the block for a spot. What felt like a modern upgrade in the late 1960s and early 1970s would quietly begin reshaping the way America shopped. Across the country, new names began to appear. Discount chains, department stores, and regional supermarts offered a wider selection than the corner grocer or the neighborhood five and dime ever could. The draw was simple: more products in one place, often at a lower price. Instead of stopping at the butcher, then the bakery, then the drugstore, families could load everything into one cart, pay at a single register, and be done. For busy parents, it felt like a gift. The shift was most visible in the parking lots that spread across once empty fields on the outskirts of town. Where downtown meant parallel parking on crowded streets, these new stores welcomed shoppers with rows of wide, free parking spaces. Cars lined up outside, their trunks ready to be filled. For many families, the convenience was irresistible. Time and money, two things always in short supply, could now be stretched further. This change wasn't only about groceries or household goods. It was cultural. The very idea of shopping shifted from a social ritual to a practical errand. Main Street had been about people as much as products, but these new stores placed emphasis on scale, efficiency, and savings. The personal touch of knowing the shopkeeper gave way to the anonymity of a cashier, who might never see the same customer twice. It wasn't that families didn't notice the trade-off they did, but in the moment, the benefits felt too good to pass up. Parents marveled at the sheer variety of cereal boxes, lined up in endless rows. Children tugged at their mother's sleeve to look at new toys, ones that would never have fit into the tight corners of a downtown shop. What once felt like a chore suddenly became a kind of spectacle, a window into the bigger world of consumer choice. Yet with each trip to these new shopping centers, Main Street grew a little quieter. Fewer footsteps echoed on the old sidewalks. Fewer bells rang as doors opened. Slowly, almost without anyone noticing, the heartbeat of small-town America began to shift away from its center. But before the giants claimed the edge of town, they quietly set up shop on Main Street itself. Woolworths had grilled cheese. Jack Penny had creaky floors. Even the chains once felt like home. In the 1970s and early 80s, national brands didn't feel like faceless corporations. They lived right there on Main Street, tucked between the barber shop and the bakery, their names painted on brick storefronts that blended into the rhythm of small-town life. Walking into Woolworths was less about shopping and more about stepping into a world of comfort. The aisles were narrow, the linoleum worn from decades of footsteps, and the lunch counter smelled of grilled cheese and tomato soup. Shoppers might browse for a pair of socks or school supplies, then slide into a booth for a slice of pie. For many families, it wasn't just a store. It was an afternoon out. Sears had its own pull, built on trust that reached far beyond the storefront. Catalog pickup counters gave families access to nearly anything: appliances, furniture, even bicycles, without ever leaving town. You circled items in the thick catalog, placed your order, and weeks later, picked it up in a plain cardboard box that felt like Christmas morning. Jack Penny, with its polished wood counters and familiar sales clerks, carried the same dependable air. Even with their national reach, these stores still felt grounded in the local community. The reason was simple. They hired local people. The cashier ringing up your purchase was a neighbor. The stock boy sweeping the floor might be someone you went to school with. These familiar faces softened the idea of big business and made chain stores feel almost like an extension of Main Street, as family of shops. You weren't just a transaction. You were part of the town. There was a kind of texture to the shopping experience that is hard to imagine today. Creaky wood floors underfoot. Brick walls that still carried the smell of dust and polish. Narrow aisles that forced people to brush shoulders and exchange polite nods. These places weren't designed for efficiency. They were designed for life as it was lived, slower and more connected. Families made outings of it. A Saturday trip downtown often meant browsing Jack Penny's clothing racks, ducking into Woolworths for a sandwich, and stopping at Sears to check out a new set of tools. Parents could run errands, while kids pressed their noses against toy displays or clutched a few coins for the candy counter. Shopping wasn't yet the solitary, rushed experience it would later become. It was still something shared. Looking back, it's easy to see why these stores held such emotional weight. They stood at the crossroads between old-fashioned Main Street shops and the impersonal malls that would soon rise. For a moment in time, even the biggest names still felt small enough to care. But it wasn't long before these beloved names followed the money and the cars. The superstores didn't just sell more. They redefined what shopping meant in America. By the 1980s, the shape of towns and the rhythm of family routines were changing. Shopping centers and enclosed malls sprouted on the outskirts, their sprawling parking lots pulling cars off Main Street and into a new kind of consumer world. For families, these places promised everything under one roof: clothes, food, electronics, even entertainment. It felt futuristic, efficient, and almost too convenient to resist. Step inside, and the difference was immediate. Gone were the creaky floors, brick walls, and narrow aisles. In their place were gleaming tiles, fluorescent lights, and uniform layouts that looked the same whether you were in Ohio or California. The names above the entrances Walmart, Target, Kmart were stamped in bold letters across the nation, erasing local identity in favor of something standardized. You could walk into a store hundreds of miles away and know exactly where to find the batteries or the laundry soap. That sameness was comforting to some, but it also came at a cost. Families were drawn in because it made sense. One stop could cover school supplies, groceries, and even a haircut. Prices were lower, parking was free, and the shelves were always stocked. For working parents pressed for time, this was a relief. The mall became not only a shopping hub, but a social one. Teenagers wandered the corridors with pretzels in hand. Food courts became gathering spots, and movie theaters sat just a short walk away. On the surface, it looked like a new golden age of consumer life, but something had shifted. The cashier was no longer a neighbor who remembered your name. Store managers rotated from city to city, rarely putting down roots. Instead of being greeted by familiar voices, shoppers were funneled through checkout lines under the hum of scanners and conveyor belts. The small rituals of connection, the butcher asking about your family, the barber passing news along, were replaced with transactions designed to be quick and impersonal. The architecture itself reflected the change. Where Main Street windows had once displayed carefully arranged goods, malls and big boxes hid everything behind blank facades and massive parking lots. The old rhythm of strolling from store to store, pausing to chat with neighbors on the sidewalk, gave way to pushing carts down endless aisles under harsh lighting. Shopping became less about community and more about efficiency, less about tradition and more about scale. In chasing bigger selections, lower prices, and faster service, Americans traded away something they hadn't realized was fragile. The human side of shopping, the warmth of belonging, was slowly being replaced by a culture of speed and sameness. For many, it felt like progress. Yet beneath the fluorescent lights and wide aisles, an emptiness was growing. And once the giants left, Main Street began to fade store by store, window by window. The barber closed. The bell on the door stopped ringing. And just like that, Main Street went quiet. What had once been the heartbeat of a town, alive with chatter, laughter, and the shuffle of feet, slowly dimmed into silence. The steady stream of customers who once filled small shops now drove past them on their way to malls and superstores. For the mom-and-pop businesses that had anchored communities for decades, the decline came quickly, and with it, a sense of loss that stretched far beyond economics. Some owners retired with no one willing or able to take over. Others tried to fight on, but bankruptcy loomed too heavy. The butcher who once knew every family by name hung up his apron. The corner hardware store, where kids bought nails for school projects and dads leaned on the counter swapping stories, shuttered its doors. It wasn't just closures. It was goodbyes to rituals that had quietly bound people together. Walking down Main Street became a different experience. Windows that once held colorful displays now stood dark and dusty. Paint peeled from signs that no longer welcomed neighbors inside. The ringing of bells, the creak of old doors, and the warm greetings of familiar faces were replaced by silence. Where once you might have seen children peering into toy shop windows or families pausing to wave at a shopkeeper, now there were emptiness rows of "For Lease" signs staring back like reminders of what had been lost. The effect on families was deeper than anyone first realized. These stores weren't just places to buy goods. They were traditions. Saturday trips to the barber, holiday shopping at Five and Dime, candy picked out with carefully saved coins. When those traditions ended, it felt as though pieces of family history were erased. Parents struggled to explain to their children why the shops they had grown up visiting were suddenly gone. For the children themselves, the loss was even sharper. The toy store wasn't just a business. It was a landmark of childhood. The empty building that replaced it carried none of that magic. In many towns, the fading of Main Street meant the fading of identity itself. Every closed store seemed to take a bit of the town's story with it. Places that once defined a community became hollow shells, leaving behind only memories. For those who remembered the liveliness, the silence carried weight. It was as if the town had lost its voice, and with it, the sense of belonging that once held neighbors close. But it wasn't just stores we lost, it was something deeper. We gained speed, but lost our stories. Was it really worth it? That question lingers when comparing the sleek efficiency of modern shopping with the slow human pace of small-town traditions. Today, we tapped a card, scanned a barcode, and walked out in minutes. The process is smooth, efficient, and anonymous. But decades ago, shopping was never just a transaction. It was an experience, a ritual, even a kind of community glue. The corner grocer knew which cut of meat your family preferred. The pharmacist asked about your mother's health. The shoe clerk bent down to lace up a child's new pair of sneakers, offering not just service, but care. These interactions weren't simply business. They were relationships. They built trust, memory, and continuity. When small stores faded, those moments faded too, replaced by fluorescent aisles and hurried self-checkouts where eye contact is optional, not expected. Progress promised us more for less, lower prices, wider selections, faster service, and on the surface, it delivered. Families who once had to stretch their budgets could fill shopping carts with bulk goods at superstores. Time once spent strolling downtown could now be saved by loading everything into a car after a single stop. Convenience became the new currency, and we gladly paid for it. But in that trade, something priceless slipped away. The shift wasn't just economic, it was emotional. Without the rhythm of weekly visits to the same shops, communities became more detached. Neighbors who once crossed paths at the bakery or lingered over conversations at the counter no longer had the same gathering spots. Shopping became solitary, stripped of its social fabric. In many ways, loneliness seeped into the places where connection had once been automatic. This change reshaped how people thought about their towns and even about themselves. Where once there was belonging, there was now anonymity. The act of buying something no longer carried the weight of tradition or memory. It was just another errand to check off the list. A store wasn't a place to be known. It was a warehouse of goods. And for all the speed and scale of progress, the meaning behind those daily rituals dissolved. Progress gave us convenience, yes, but it also left us emptier. It taught us to value efficiency over connection, savings over stories, quantity over quality of life. For many, the cost was invisible until it was too late. A quiet loneliness, a hollowing out of traditions, and the realization that something irreplaceable had been lost in the exchange. And just when Main Street thought it couldn't get worse, something even bigger arrived. Then came Amazon, and the store in your town became a website. What once required a trip across town, a friendly greeting, and the sound of a bell above the door could now be done from a living room couch. The late 1990s and early 2000s brought a tidal wave of change, faster and more disruptive than anything Main Street had ever seen. At first, it felt like magic. A few clicks on Amazon or eBay, and a package appeared at the doorstep days later, soon hours later. Shopping no longer meant driving, parking, or waiting in line. The entire process was invisible, frictionless, and astonishingly convenient. What superstores had started speed and efficiency online shopping perfected. But with that came collapse. Legacy chains that had once defined American retail, Sears, Jackpenney, Toys, or U.S. struggled to adapt. The catalogs that once landed in mailboxes were replaced by glowing screens. The grand department stores that anchored malls for generations shuttered. One after another, their vast spaces left dark and empty. Shopping centers became ghost towns, their fountains dry, their food courts echoing with silence. For local businesses, the blow was even harsher. Main Street shops, already weakened by decades of competition, now faced an enemy they couldn't see and couldn't match. How could a family-owned bookstore compete with a website that shipped millions of titles overnight? How could a local hardware store keep up with endless digital aisles and algorithm-driven discounts? Slowly, storefront after storefront went dark, replaced not by something new, but by nothing at all. The shift was more than economic, it was cultural. The tactile, sensory world of shopping, with its smells of popcorn in the mall or fresh leather in the shoe store, was exchanged for scrolling through screens. The act of browsing, of stumbling upon something unexpected, was replaced by algorithms that predicted what you wanted before you even thought of it. It was efficient, but it lacked surprise. It lacked human presence, and people felt it. The joy of trying on a jacket, the small talk with a cashier, the moment of running into a neighbor, all of it faded. Shopping became solitary, stripped of touch, sound, and serendipity. In its place came tracking numbers, cardboard boxes, and emails that read, "Your order has shipped." By the 2010s, America had entered a new normal. For many, a town center was no longer its downtown or even its mall. It was a glowing screen. The heart of commerce had been uploaded, digitized, and delivered in brown cardboard stamped with a smile. But just as it all seemed lost, something surprising began to happen. A new generation is discovering the charm of old storefronts and breathing life into the past. Across America, in places long written off as forgotten, something unexpected has begun to stir. Main streets that once sat quiet, their windows dark and facades fading, are being brushed with fresh paint, lit with warm bulbs, and filled again with the hum of conversation. It's not the same as before, but in a way, that's the beauty of it. Small-town revival movements have been taking root from coast to coast. Local groups and city leaders, often led by young entrepreneurs, are restoring historic districts brick by brick. Where there were once empty shelves, now stand coffee shops with chalkboard menus, bookstores with handwritten notes tucked into the covers, and bakeries where the smell of fresh bread draws people down the sidewalk. These aren't just businesses, they're signals of life, proof that people still crave connection and place. Farmers markets have become the new gathering spot, turning parking lots and parks into weekly celebrations. Tables overflow with produce, homemade jams, crafts, and baked goods, each stand telling a story about the person behind it. Unlike the anonymous aisles of a big box store, here the exchange is personal, a handshake, a conversation, a smile. For many, it feels less like shopping and more like belonging. Artisan shops and small makers are thriving too. Soaps carved by hand, candles poured in local kitchens, furniture built from reclaimed wood. These objects carry meaning because they are made with care. The slow living movement, driven by nostalgia for a less hectic world, has taken hold among younger generations who never actually lived through Main Street's prime, but who imagine and yearn for its spirit. For them, shop local isn't just about money, it's about identity. Communities are reclaiming pride in themselves through festivals, street fairs, and seasonal events. A fall harvest market, a Christmas parade, or a summer concert series on the courthouse lawn becomes more than entertainment. It's a way to write a shared story again. Towns that once felt overlooked are rediscovering their own worth, and people are showing up, not because they have to, but because they want to. Nostalgia has fueled much of this renaissance, but it isn't only about looking backward. It's about pulling the best of the past forward, slowing down, choosing connection, finding beauty in the ordinary. It's a reminder that even in an age of instant delivery, people still long for places that feel real, places that feel alive. Because no matter how much changes, one truth still holds. Main Street isn't just a place. It's a feeling. And in some towns, it's coming back to life. For those who remember it, Main Street carries the echo of footsteps on worn sidewalks, the creak of a shop door, and the warmth of being known by name. For those discovering it anew, it represents something almost lost, a reminder that community was never meant to be replaced, only overlooked for a time. Looking back, it's easy to see the arc of change. From the small-town bustle of the 1950s and 60s to the rise of malls, to the digital flood that seemed to wash it all away, Main Street has endured. It has survived not by standing still, but by shifting its meaning. Even in the years when storefronts sat empty, the memory of Main Street lived on in hearts and stories, waiting for its moment to matter again. Because Main Street was never only about shopping. It was about trust. It was about gathering. It was about the little threads of daily life that, when woven together, created something larger than any single store or purchase. These values of connection, belonging, care do not vanish with time. They outlast trends, corporations, and even entire industries. In towns where revival has taken root, the return of Main Street is more than economic. It's emotional. People are realizing that in a world of speed and screens, slowing down and showing up has its own kind of wealth. Every farmer's market, every family-run diner, every restored storefront is proof that people still crave places where life feels shared. And for those who carry the memory of a Main Street now gone, the lesson is just as clear. The heart of America is not built from glass towers or online carts. It beats strongest in the places where neighbors gather, where stories are passed across counters, and where people find reasons to belong to each other. So perhaps Main Street never really left. It has been waiting, sometimes in silence, sometimes in memory, for us to recognize what we lost and what we still need. Its spirit is not tied to geography or time. It lives in the values we choose to carry forward, the connections we choose to keep alive. Which Main Street memory do you remember most? Share your stories below.